My boyfriend and his best friend are going on a week-long vacation without me, and I'm not sure how to feel about it. My boyfriend wanted to go on a vacation this summer to his mom's friend's house in Hawaii with me, and his two best friends, 25 male and 29 female. We had been planning on this all spring, and at some point 25M dropped out of the trip, leaving just the three of us. For context, my boyfriend and I have been going out since November, and it's been serious. We had and still have been talking about moving in together, and he has said, and I agree, that this is a long-term situation, and that we are in it for good. In early June, once 25M unexpectedly dropped out of the trip, 29F called my boyfriend and told him that now that it was just the three of us, she didn't feel comfortable with me going on the trip, since she didn't know me that well, and she didn't want to be a third wheel. She said that if I were to go, she wouldn't go on the trip. Without telling me that this was happening, they changed the plans and made it a trip, just the two of them, and they changed the location to a beach in Costa Rica. I was trying to figure out when to ask for time off this summer, and hadn't heard news about the plans. So I asked my boyfriend which week in August I should be setting aside for the Hawaii trip. He let me know that, actually, he had talked to his friend, and that she didn't want to go if I were going. So he was going to go alone with her to Costa Rica. He said that we could go another week later, maybe to Mexico City or something. I was upset, and tried to talk with him about how the situation made me feel, especially since this wasn't a case of a separate trip being set up ahead of time. This was a case of me being invited and then uninvited from a week-long tropical vacation with a girlfriend of his who I had never met before. We eventually decided to do a trip together to Copenhagen, which we have both wanted to visit, as some sort of compensation. I also asked to meet her, so that I could feel more comfortable with the trip. We spent the 4th of July going to see her and her boyfriend in the city where they live, and although it was nice to put a face to a name, it was ultimately a very cold trip and she was not at all welcoming to me. My boyfriend remarked on how unfriendly she was to both of us. He thought and said that he was surprised that she didn't act warmly to me. I went out of my way to try get to know her and her boyfriend. I'm very outgoing and friendly, and usually this would be easy. But it didn't really click, even after several days. They were somewhat cold to each other as well. They bickered a little bit about their future, and his own 3-week trip without her, that was scheduled for the same time as their trip. This had been scheduled before ours had. This had been my effort to feel better about the trip, so I told my boyfriend that I still didn't feel comfortable with things, and that I was feeling insulted by the way that it was handled. I had tried to make things smooth between all of us, and I asked him to please come up with something that could help me feel better about the trip. On a visit to his family, they asked about the trip and they were all shocked that he would have arranged it this way, and let me know that they would have been furious if they were in my position. Which triggered a fight in which I asked him to please help come up with a strategy to make me feel better and more secure about them going together without me. He said that he would never do this kind of thing again, which feels like not much to offer, since this is kind of a once-in-a-lifetime trip to begin with. He kind of offered to not go on the trip, but he had already paid for the tickets and made arrangements, and I didn't want to stop their trip and be resented by both him and his best friend. He asked me to give him ideas of how to make me feel better, and wanted me to just tell him what to do, and stalled until it was finally the day of the trip. He bought me a bag of peanut butter cups and I drove the two of them to the airport. I feel so disregarded and disrespected in this situation. I want to break up with him, but I don't want to burn up something that has otherwise been really good. TL Drive I-28F was uninvited from a vacation with my boyfriend 29M and his best friend 29F, and I can't get over it. I want advice on how to talk with him about this. Comments. Comment 1. The boyfriend repeating how he just doesn't understand after literal months of dismissing oops concerns is giving me major missing reasons vibes. But babe, I don't understand why you're breaking up with me. I only picked my female best friend who I once had romantic feelings for, and is known to pursue men already in relationships over you, uninvited you to the vacation we planned, refused to even try to compromise, and invalidated your feelings constantly. But now I'm shocked that you want to call it quits. Comment 2. Yeah, kind of wish she had left it only at that. I doubt he actually absorbed any of the reasons from her long note, just like he ignored her objections when it happened. He was just upset that he might look like the bad guy, and felt entitled enough to demand she explain herself again. Also, after all the repeated conversations, I seriously doubt that he didn't know what was wrong. I think he specifically wanted her to explain in person so he could talk her out of it, and the note precluded that. I also wonder if this whole thing was a strategy. Some bad advice I see guys get is to introduce dread into a relationship to make the girlfriend more clingy, which is awful and blows things up instead, or qualifies as a foundation of abuse if they stay. But I digress. I was friends with a guy who was manipulative for a while. and he kept doing things that in retrospect were an obvious attempt to wear me down and undermine my independence. Like to the point of calling me his slave to my face. I was raised to be a doormat by my parents. It had built up enough over time that I was just done with him. He also wanted an explanation why I didn't want to be friends, but I knew it would be exhausting to go over everything and have him argue about it. I understood why he always felt like other people blew up at him when they dropped him, and no longer cared that I was one of them. Sometimes you don't need a long explanation or to hash it out. It's okay to just go. Update. I was really upset the day I dropped him off and he was texting me, but I wasn't responding. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I didn't want to do anything at all in the state I was in. I waited until the next day, and then I sent him a thought-out text, letting him know that I didn't feel safe or loved in the way the trip was handled, and that I would be dropping his things off at his place, and leaving his keys with the neighbor. He called but didn't leave any messages, and then he messaged me that he didn't understand. The rest of the week he called and messaged me, but I couldn't bring myself to pick up or text back. On Thursday I think that he realized that I was serious, and he asked me some questions about logistical things. I told him which neighbor his key was with, etc. When he got back and saw all his things at his place, he got pretty frantic and called and left me a long message. I was working all day, but also I still didn't want to respond. He asked me to explain because he didn't understand what was going on. The next day I sent another text making it clear that it was over, and he got upset and sent me a bunch of texts in a row about how he didn't understand why I was throwing away everything that we built. He left me a voicemail that was really angry that said he had no idea why I was upset, and that he did not accept the breakup because he had no say in it, and that he wanted me to tell him the evil story that I had made up about him to his face. I wasn't going to respond to him and I wanted to remain calm, but this upset me. So I sat down to write him this letter. It's long, so skip over if you want. I tried to call him, but I started crying and told him I'd just send him an email instead. This is what it said. The time that we have had apart has given me some good space and time to think. I have had a chance to think about the things that are important for me in a relationship, and I see that we should not be together. I am sorry that I have been asking for you to change things about your life that you shouldn't have to change at my or anyone's behest. From the very start, this trip was made in an insanely disrespectful way in which it started out from you being given an ultimatum by your female best friend, who I had never met, that either she goes or I go on this trip, and you picked her. You didn't offer to have her meet me. Theoretically, I was your long-term partner, so this would have made a lot of sense. You didn't encourage her to find someone else to come, and you didn't consult me at all. That's enough for most people to have a deal breaker right there. However, I stayed. This is a person who you have a history with that is not entirely clear to me. Here is what I understand. Some bad rumors got started about the two of you in which you spent an entire night out with her on an acid trip while you were dating someone else. Nothing happened. The other thing I understand is that you were interested in her romantically at some, theoretically other, point, and that she started dating her boyfriend, and that closed the door on things for you. According to what I also understand, it took a long time for 29F's boyfriend to feel comfortable with you being around, but you apparently worked to ultimately make him feel comfortable with you after I'm not sure how long. This is the completely unknown person who shut me out of a trip that I was originally going to go on unilateral decision. You did not tell me this was happening until I asked when the trip to Hawaii would be. You purchased tickets in another very disrespectful situation in which I have cooked dinner and have guests present, and you choose to go into my room for well over an hour to select tickets with her. And in which I repeatedly ask you to please come to dinner, because you say it will just be a few more minutes each time. There is absolutely no reason for doing it at that time, and in that situation, seeing as how she is in the same time zone as us, and has a 9-5 job. This makes me feel sick to my stomach. So, to make myself feel better about this whole arrangement, I tell you that I want to meet this person. On my request, we arrange a trip to go meet her, and her boyfriend, a brief trip in which they are, and you explicitly agree, inexplicably cold. The first conversation that we have is one in which 29F and her boyfriend argue about how she DM'd him while he was already in a relationship, and got him to date her instead. You tell me about conversations that 29F has had with you recently in which it seems implied that there is some real instability in their long-term relationship stuff about kids and dogs. I have a discussion in which I let you know that I see that, and that it worries me. Meanwhile, I am still wanting all of this to work out for you and for me, and for her. I at this point am planning on being with you for the long term and see no benefit in telling you to not go on a trip with your best friend. I want it to work out. But each and every interaction surrounding this trip chips and chips away at my ability to handle it, the conversations that seem to go nowhere, etc. Your dad, your mom, and your grandparents are all very surprised when we tell them about this trip. It is becoming very obvious that this is a dangerous trip to make with the fragility of our relationship. 29M, we had only been together for 9 months. How long did it take before 29F's boyfriend was comfortable with you hanging around? Much less going on a one-on-one international tropical vacation in which he was uninvited because of your request. We go over it with friend at the rock climbing gym. We go over it in the car. We go over it while we're booking our Airbnb for Copenhagen. We go over it when I tell you that I still feel uncomfortable, and I do not feel good about the trip. Talk about repeatedly saying something. Although I ask for you to help me, you actually ask me instead to come up with what would make me feel better. Surprisingly, I have no ideas either. Ultimately, it appears that the original plan to meet at my place and hang out and do a game night before you two go on the trip has been cancelled, and 29F will be staying at my place, but not hanging out with us at all beforehand. You attribute it to you not bringing it up with her early enough. This is apparently not something that was discussed even 2 nights before the trip. This upsets me. You do not know what to do. I don't blame you at this point. It was well out of hand. I don't know what to do either. There is no good solution that I can think of besides waiting for the trip to be over. I tell you that either I have to get over it, or I have to break up with you, and that I don't want to break up with you. But my ability to get over it is rather worn down. She arrives at my place very late, and we wake up the next morning for me to take the 2 of you to the airport. After all of this lead up, I know that you can tell how unhappy I am. I fully absolutely know you can tell how unhappy I am. You leave, and when I don't respond to your text messages, you text me to tell me that you hope I'm okay and you're going to bed. No call. The rest of the week was rough. My text to you was met with, essentially, "I'm sorry you feel this way, you tell me that I'm being unfair." There is no acknowledgement, and there still has been none, that this trip to a fucking honeymoon destination, as we have discussed before, could be a crazy and horrible thing to go through with, even with my quasi-blessing. This is not something that people in relationships have to deal with. This is not something that people in relationships do, besides 29F, I guess. In the end, all of this is to say that I have felt serious emotional needs go seriously unmet in a way that is a deal breaker for me. There have been some wonderful, very positive times, but there has been an unnecessary amount of heartache and suffering for me over things that come down to what I can only assume are personal differences. I cannot handle your relationship with 29F. And I suppose I could ask you to pick between her and me, but that's not what I want to do. I want you to have your best friend, and I want to leave. I did love you. But I am not about to fight this fight, and hear you tell me that I'm crazy for not seeing how totally platonic everything is for the rest of my life. It seems like trying to convince someone to like different food, or to have a different favorite color. I am not happy in this, and I do not want to feel these feelings any longer. There is no need for this to be mutual. I do not need your permission to break up with you. He wrote me back an apologetic email in which he accepted responsibility for most things without any argument, except he denied anything that had to do with his relationship with her making me feel uncomfortable, and he denied that I would not be able to handle their relationship. He said that the only thing that made their trip bad for me was my own perspective. I wrote him back that trust has to be built, and that he put too much strain too early on a relationship in which we had not developed that trust. He agreed and apologized. For me, it ended on a pretty amicable note, but this style of relationship really doesn't work for me, and I don't feel like his responses to me really healed or changed anything significantly. I stand by my decision at this point. Now, for the next story. How do I talk to my husband about my 28-year-old son's new girlfriend? I apologize for any issue with the post, as I don't really use Reddit, but I couldn't think of anywhere else to ask for advice anonymously. I have 3 sons, 32, 28, and 26. All of my sons are very successful young men and are on their own. My oldest and youngest were always very outgoing, and were kind of party animals in high school and college. My middle focused on his grades and future from a young age. He moved out the youngest into his own home. Anyway, my middle had a very bad ex-girlfriend. I would like to say worse, but I read the rules here. Basically, they dated since 17 and she cheated on him several times. My son never left because he loved her, but eventually he realized she was a bad woman and left her. Only took 8 years. Anyway, my oldest got married at 29 and my youngest is engaged. They give my middle son a lot of crap because he is single, but I always say that his ex kind of messed up his sense of love and confidence. They don't understand what he went through. My husband agrees. 6 months ago he started dating this new girl that we just met yesterday. I was happy to hear that he found someone. She is very educated and smart, according to him. They have similar personalities and interests. Considering my middle is kind of a nerd, That made me very happy to hear. Anyway, I wanted to meet her immediately. My son said that she is very shy and it would take her time. 6 months later, she told him that she is ready to meet us. So Friday afternoon, my husband decides to grill. Everyone comes over. Then my son and his new girlfriend show up. This beautiful girl walks in holding his hand and standing behind him. He was right, she is very shy. We all introduce ourselves and we will call her Sadie. Sadie was quiet but said hi to everyone. She honestly associated the most with our dog that night. My sons go out and help their dad cook. My daughter-in-law goes out with my grandbaby. And soon-to-be daughter-in-law and her are best friends till they go out together. I ask if Sadie would like to help me finish the sides and chop some stuff. She says sure. I just ask how they met, and typical conversations. Eventually my middle son comes in and comes up behind her, pokes her booty. She gives him a really look and hits in the arm, and he grabs her and pick her up as they laugh. I say put her down, don't be so rough on her. My son just says okay, put her down, and goes back out. I said sorry, 3 boys. Sometimes they are a little too rough, but he is harmless. She said, I know he is. I used to wrestle with my dad and brother growing up too. I said, your mom let her daughter wrestle her older brother and dad? She said, well, I used to be a boy, so I guess it was different, and giggled. I froze. I said, what? Her face went snow white and immediate tears rolled down her face. She said, he didn't tell you. I went, no. She said, I think I should leave. I am sorry. I grabbed her and said, no, stay here. I said, does my son know? She said, yes, he knows. She then said, I always bring it up first date, so if there are issues, we don't waste each other's time. To be honest, I am very surprised, but my son has never been so happy, so I dropped it. I honestly just couldn't believe it. I mean, you would never know. She is gorgeous. She asked if I though of her different. I said that you make my son happy, and as long as you treat him right, I won't care. She just said thank you. I called my son today because his dad wants to get to know her more, and wants to go to dinner with just them and us. He said sure. I brought up our conversation and he said he knows. He said that she is just really shy about it, doesn't talk about it at all. She just tried to run under the radar. He said that since you know we need to tell dad, but they discussed me kind of pre-telling my husband. Before tomorrow evening. Any idea on how? Or should I tell my son before we go that he and her are going to have to do it? Any help would greatly appreciated, thank you. Comments. Comment 1. I was in a same-sex relationship from 19 to mid-20s. And I asked my mom to tell my granddad, her dad, for me. The next week he comes around for a coffee and to see my parents, which wasn't super unusual, but this time my mom hounded me to come out and see him too, and made the whole family sit around a table and eat cake and drink coffee. There was this super awkward aura around us, when suddenly my granddad clears his throat and goes, you know. I never understood the big issue with kids not having a dad. My dad was in wars for most of my childhood, and I was raised by multiple women, and turned out great. Then he just drinks his coffee while my mom stares at me waiting for me to connect the dots that he's telling me he loves me the way I am. He's the best granddad. Comment 2. My sister had to get drunk to work up the courage to tell my mom she was gay. She came downstairs drunk at 2 a.m. to come out to my mom, who was knocked out asleep. She tearfully tells my mom she gay with trembling voice. My mom looks at her and says, is that all? Girl, this could have waited until the morning rolls over and goes back to sleep. Update. I took the advice and told my husband earlier than I had planned. I told him at noon when we were going to pick up my son, we will call Sam and Sadie at 6. The conversation basically was fairly quick. I just told him I needed to tell him something, and he had to promise me not to be upset. He just said speak. I just said, Sadie is trans. He just went, okay. He said we'll talk later. I said something about dinner and he just said we will talk later. I told Sam and told him I have his back. On the drive to Sam's place I told my husband that Sam loves her and makes him happy. I explained it took a lot of courage from Sadie to be open with us right from the beginning. My husband just said we will talk later, and said I promise I will be on my best behavior. We go pick up Sam and Sadie. It was a nice restaurant, so my husband and Sam were in polos and dress pants. Sadie and I were in dresses. They looked so cute together when I saw them. They were matching and everything. We go to dinner and my husband is acting normal. Just asking questions to Sam and Sadie about intentions, how they met, etc. After dinner, I give her a lot of credit. Sadie tried to bring it up with my husband. He just said hold that thought, let's go get ice cream. Husband is obsessed with ice cream. Will always find an excuse to get it. So we go as he is, just telling jokes to everyone in the car and acting a fool as he always does. We get there and ask what everyone wants. My husband's favorite is chocolate. Mine is cookies and cream, Sam's strawberry, and Sadie's is butter pecan. I promise this matters. We get our ice cream, and after a few minutes my husband says, "It's weird how there are so many different types of ice cream. When I was a kid there was like 2 or 3. Now they have hundreds, it seems like." I was confused where my husband was going with this. He then said, "As long as the ice cream that you like tastes good to you and makes you happy, I don't mind forking out a few dollars for a smile." He then winked at Sam and Sadie. That was it. That was the discussion. We took them home and he gave Sam and Sadie each a hug and told Sadie he hopes she can make it to more dinners on the weekends as we do them often. Sadie said that she will. All I have to say, I held my husband's arm the whole way home. I am guilty, I did give him a big present for it. Thank you everyone for your support and kind words. It seems everything is going to be fine.